Welcome to Coffee and U.S. History in the Kitchen with Mr. Evans. And today we're going to dive right in, and I am going to admit my bias. So today we're going to talk about World War II, and my father was a World War II veteran. This is his honorable discharge from the Army of the United States. And it's dated May 1948, and he was discharged with the rank of corporal. So my father proudly fought in the Pacific in World War II. So always with an eye to checking your sources, right? I'm admitting I have a bias. If you've watched my videos, you know that I don't hold back. We talk about the mistakes America has made. Today is a lesson about how we are the good guys wearing the white hats. So hopefully you've already done your background and you know about the attack on Pearl Harbor. And today the title is Dark Days for the Allies, because I want you to understand how bad things went at first for the American side, right? So we know the Axis powers are Germany, Italy, and Japan. The American side is going to be known as the Allies again, only capital A instead of small a this time. And the decision is made by FDR and our allies to focus on Europe first, with the idea that Hitler and the Nazis are the bigger threat. And so England and France are pledging that if we help them defeat Hitler and Mussolini, then they will help us with Japan later on. Now, obviously, we're going to have to send some troops to fight the Japanese in the Pacific at the same time. But the main thrust, the strategy is to try to get victory over Europe first, and then the Allies will help us defeat Japan later. The attack on Pearl Harbor was a huge win for Japan, but almost immediately after attacking Pearl Harbor, the Japanese also attacked the Philippines, and they are having great success there as well. So on the American side, we are quickly falling back and losing territory and ground in the Philippines, and in fact, the Japanese are going to take over the Philippine Islands. Many brave Filipino soldiers were fighting with the American soldiers, and they're going to be captured as well. And at this point, the Japanese military, which had been trained in the same kind of racist ideology as the Nazis, right? And young men brainwashed to believe that they are superior, right? They are then going to treat the American and Filipino prisoners horribly. After weeks, months of fighting in some places, American soldiers surrender. One of the places where this happens is an island called Bataan, and the Japanese then are going to decide they want to march the captured soldiers, the captured prisoners, from one end of the island to the other. Now that is normal in a time of warfare, that you may need to move prisoners around to put them in prison camps. But what was not normal is how the Japanese did it. They marched these men through the hot jungle 65 miles without food or water, and without the opportunity to take rest breaks, even if they were sick or injured, right? Thousands are going to die along the way. So I will quote here Lester Tenney, who was in the U.S. Army at the time. It was called the Death March because of the way they killed you. If you stopped walking, you died. If you had to defecate, you died. If you had a malaria attack, you died. It made no difference what it was. Either they cut your head off, they shot you, or they bayoneted you. But you died if you fell down. So this was part of the horror and the brutality of World War II. Right? There was really no need for the Japanese soldiers to act this way. They had clearly won the battle. There was no counterattack coming. They could have allowed these prisoners rest breaks and water and still maintained order just fine. It was about a sense of superiority and cruelty and the arrogance that you could do whatever you want to your enemy because you were superior. We don't even know for sure how many thousands died on what became known as the Bataan Death March, but certainly it was in the thousands. Many would survive the march only to die in prison camps later on, and so it's hard to get exact figures. So in April of 1942, America has not just been beaten badly in the Hawaiian Islands, America is being beaten badly in the South Pacific, in the Philippines, right? So how about our strategy, the Allied strategy of winning in Europe? Well, before we can get to Europe, America has to join England and France in gaining North Africa, right? The plan was to attack what was referred to as the soft underbelly of Europe, come up through Italy, because the Americans felt like Mussolini's army is weaker than the German army. But before we can launch an attack into Italy, America and our allies have to take North Africa. How's that going? Well, that is not going well for the Allied side either. In North Africa, the German general Erwin Rommel is leading the Africa Corps, and he's kicking Allied butt, quite frankly. There's a lot of tank warfare. The German panzers are superior in the beginning of the war to the Allied tanks. Rommel is going to get the nickname from the British, the Desert Fox. And so in May of 1942, the German Africa Corps, under the command of Rommel, is also winning battles and controlling North Africa. So what about the other Allied power that we haven't mentioned yet? The Soviet Union, right? As you remember, the Soviet Union signed a non-aggression pact with Hitler and the Nazis, and Hitler, being the liar he is, went back and on his word and attacked the Russians anyway. And so the German army has been rolling into the Soviet Union starting in the fall of 1941. And in September of 1941, the Russians finally rally around the city of Leningrad. The German army, though, essentially surrounds the city and puts it under siege. Almost nobody can get in or out after September 1941. In fact, the siege lasts over 2 years. Right? Now, think about this. This is a large city that before the fighting had more than 1 million people, a couple million people. Well, with the roads shut off and the airplanes all shut down and the trains not running, right? There's no food getting into the city, right? I mean, how do you supply a city that large, right, when you know the grocery stores are going to be empty quickly and there's not enough food for people? And so the city runs out of food. People began eating their animals, cats and dogs. In the wintertime, the temperature would get down to 30 or 40 degrees below zero. And the bodies were so frozen and cold in the wintertime that they couldn't bury them. The ground and the bodies were so, rock hard that they couldn't bury the bodies. And so the rats would feed on the dead bodies in the street, and without the cats around and with all this carcasses to feed on, the rat problem became scary, and the infestation of disease throughout the city as well, right? In many cases, of course, the plumbing's destroyed, so there's no running water, so you had to try to melt or boil the snow to get something to drink. And people died by the hundreds of thousands. Again, it's another one of these cases where historians don't even know exactly how many died. A low-end estimate is probably 600,000, right? Now, this is not throughout the Soviet Union. This is 600,000 Russians in just the lone city of Leningrad, right? Just that one city in those 2 years, in that 2-year-long siege battle, right? So in the spring of 42, the Allied side is losing in the Pacific, losing in North Africa, and losing on the eastern side in the Soviet Union, right? That's why title this lecture, Dark Days for the Allies. Realize how in 1942, how desperate the situation looked and how easy it would have been for Americans to give up, to say it was too late. We entered the war too late. It's not our fault, but it's too late. We need to just pull back. And there certainly were a few Americans who suggested that and thought about that, right? And yet how important it was for America and the rest of the Allies to press on and continue battling, right? Think of who is running the Axis at this point. Hitler, Mussolini, and this Japanese military, and the atrocities that they're committing all over the planet, right? At this point in 1942, we don't know about the Holocaust. We don't know about the death camps. A lot of that stuff isn't going to come to light until later, right? And so think of the courage it took for what is sometimes called the greatest generation of Americans to press on in this fight, right? When all looked lost, right? And so as you're going through your reading or the next part of the lessons, right? The next title is Turning the Tide, right? How do the Allies turn the tide around and come back and win this war, right? Because it looked hopeless in 1942. I want you to understand at many points in human history, sometimes things look really bleak. They look horrible, they look bad, and yet some people manage to fight on. The Allies do win this war. Thank goodness they do. It may be one of the few times in world history where truly there was one side that was overwhelmingly good and wearing the white hats, and one side that was overwhelmingly evil. If there ever was a good war, this was it.